Guitar Business Radio is the podcast for the business of guitar, where you'll always get no reviews, no demos, and no idle chatter. From players to CEOs and in between. If you have a professional or business connection to the world of guitar, this show is your window to insight and information you won't get anywhere else. I'm Jeffrey D. Brown, and I approve this message. So let's get to it. From Guitar Business Media, welcome to the 62nd episode of GBR. Our special guest for the hour is the well-known New York guitar builder, Cris Mirabella. He's enjoyed a very long career in the business, about 37 years. And considering that Cris is only 47 years old, that makes you wonder how he got started. And believe me, he's going to tell us all about that, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, as usual, a brief announcement about yet another new development at GBR, and that's our brand new Facebook group called, appropriately, the Guitar Business Group. What else would it be called? It's the official Facebook group for Guitar Business Radio. It's connected to our page on Facebook at Guitar Business. Now, this group was created for the benefit of our listeners and others who have a business or professional connection to the world of guitar. Our discussions are centered around a vast array of topics related to the business of guitar from all angles. So whether you're a guitar builder or a guitar player, a CEO, entrepreneur, or just work in the business some other way, this group is for you. So if you're on Facebook, just search for Guitar Business Group, or you can find the link on the Guitar Business Radio page as well. Also, don't forget to join me after the interview today in the back of the show segment, where we always offer you our interview wrap-up, as well as some original but quite useful commentary you will not get anywhere else. I promise you that. And while you're considering your next move to the Guitar Business Group, we'll just keep things moving right along to something completely different. My guest on GBR today is Cris Mirabella. For 37 years, he's been passionately attached to the guitar business. And at 47, that means he spent nearly his whole life in the business. Along the way, he's learned a few things, and for the last quarter of a century, he's been operating his own business, Mirabella Guitars. He's earned a reputation of being one of the top builders of New York-style archtop guitars that clearly reflect his own very unique style. Well, there's a lot to unpack here, so let's get to it as Cris Mirabella joins us right here and right now. Hey, Cris, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show with us today, all the way from way on the other side of the country. And welcome to GBR.
I appreciate it, Jeff, and it's thankful to have the opportunity to talk with you today.
Great. Yeah, me too. Okay, well, let's get into the historical mode like we always do at the front here and find out about some of the things that, during your youth that influenced you and had the most impact on your later life. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, growing up, music was always a priority and kind of filled the house. My father, who was an Italian immigrant, actually was a classical musician, a piano player. So there was always music being played, instruments, everything on the weekends and stuff like that with family. And actually very early on when I was about 5, he had decided, because he actually became part of the space program and was one of the designers of the LEM, worked for one of the Grumman's guys. So he had said to me at some point, he goes, I wanted to be a musician. I'm going to let you be the musician. And he started me at classical lessons on guitar at 5.
So this was living vicariously somewhat, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think he was such a gentleman. He never pushed. So I don't know if he was living, but as much as I think he saw music, my father was very full of art. Everything was painting, sculpture, music. Everything he looked at, he was the guy you took a walk with, and he would literally gently pause you by putting out his hand and then pointing to like a flower or the sky and saying, look how beautiful that is. And take note of that, because it's so much easier to see the negativity or stresses in the world, that it's far better to stop and take a moment and see that beauty.
Well, that's a great place to start out too, because especially with the type of work that you do and that sort of thing, is to have that sort of, sensitivity or or eye for those things?
Absolutely, yeah. His thing was always enjoy the moment and be thankful for that. Be simply thankful for the opportunity of the moment, and you'll appreciate it more. So it kind of set me up for being really enjoying the moment of the detail of having to carve a top, having to make sure the aspect of the restoration was exactly perfect, because each aspect of it got you closer to that goal of seeing the beautiful finish. So it would set that tone. But with the classical lessons that he and him wanting me to be a musician, the unfortunate part was he had gotten me this very strict classical teacher.
Oh boy!
And who would hit my hands if I was not in the proper position. So while the guitar itself was intriguing to me, and I was curious about how it made the sounds and everything, the somewhat just strictness of this always would turn it into a negative. Mm-hmm. And being that young and coming home to my Matchbox cars and stuff like that, I found it far more, fun. So, and again, my dad being a wonderful man and not pushing, I think after trying for a while, said, okay. And he gave up, and I became, the typical little kid. And then regrettably, my dad got sick and passed away when I was 9.
Oh, yeah. Jeez, that's terrible.
Yeah. So when that happened, really kind of, I was a shy guy, even though I was young, but I was still kind of shy at that point. I really kind of, kept to myself and was kind of really just not understanding how I would fit in this world. And now although I had an incredible mom, who was going to help guide me through this thing I didn't understand, because now he was gone. And thankfully so, my cousin Chucky, who was a wonderful guy in some way, he was into planes. He was going to get into flying. So my dad as well just adored my cousin, and he was always at the house. And my dad seemingly would always give him money for when he was going on a date so he could treat the girl very nice and stuff like that. So Chucky kind of switched roles. And came to, actually he had called one day and he had said, listen, I know you're feeling down and stuff. He goes, I have something for you. He goes, I want to bring you something. He goes, it's some music. He goes, it's different than what your dad had listened to. He goes, but I think you'll enjoy it. And again, throughout the house, there was always the opera, classical. Mm-hmm. In fact, when my dad would leave for work, my mom, who enjoyed country music, you would know my dad had gone because the radio would change, and all of a sudden there was this kind of, so you're like, oh, Dad's gone. But
that invokes kind of a feeling, doesn't it? Yeah, you really just by the circumstances, you know that things have altered a little bit, and
and it was nice too, because it was just, although it wasn't as dominant as the classical and the opera music going through the house, it was something I heard regularly. And it was, again, all the classics like Patsy Cline and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, all that type of stuff, and all the pedal steel players and all that stuff. So it was like this, well, wow, what's that sound?
Yeah.
And again, my mom, just like my father, but just without the musical background, so much it loved and enjoyed music. Again, it was always yet another positive, even though it was like, something different. And it just was that hint that, oh, okay, Dad's at work now. There's this. But when my dad passed away and Chucky came with the albums, what he brought me was a Led Zeppelin album.
Oh.
A Jimi Hendrix album, and a Black Sabbath album.
Wow.
So he kind of covered a whole range of the rock and heavy rock music. But the one that really just hit was the Hendrix album. And I remember just listening to it, and with all my, uncertainties as far as being a young guy losing what really was, in essence, my biggest hero, now this it gave me a comfort in that it was what my dad liked. It was music, but it was like that could be the hero. That could be the thing that you can focus on and have I felt some comfort and for some reason, some sense of a direction listening to that guitar.
Wow. Good realization at an early age.
Yeah. Again, I thankfully, Jeff, I'll tell you, both of my parents were amazing people. And I hope in all that I do, and I'm thankful for in the opportunity I have here with you today, I get to talk about them. So it's my part as their child to try to do the best and do something really cool that is meaningful to all the players. But at the same time, there's a little bit of selfishness in that it allows me to constantly talk about them. And in my way, then they get to be a part of this as well.
Well, I think people appreciate that, and this is a show about people. I mean, we're a business show, and we talk about the business, but first and foremost, we're talking about the people we're talking about and talking to anyway. And so, I appreciate it, and I know the audience does too.
No, thank you, man. So yeah. So with that, I just found that it just felt like that was I felt comfortable. And again, being the shy kid, what the other amazing factor and aspect of it was, the guitar could talk for me. And whenever I hear someone mention something like that, how they love their instrument, whether it's a guitar or something else, and how they can speak through that. And as a builder, that's my goal, to give the player this instrument that gives them the voice they hear in their head. That was how I perceived that guitar. I was like, you know what, I don't have to try to change. Because, you have people that love you and say, oh, well, just get out there and talk a little bit more. Go play with the kid over there or whatever. That was difficult, and especially at that time because I was so far drawn in because of my dad's passing. The guitar became that friend, and it was the friend that would talk to someone else for you. And it was an interesting way that people would then talk to me because they'd go, oh, you play guitar or something like that. So I immediately bonded with it. It was completely different than the classical lessons as a kid. And I actually went to the local music store and bought myself Alfred's book 1 and 2. I first went through 1, learned it. And back then, as young kids, you probably remember we all could have paper routes.
Yeah.
And I had convinced my sister to give me her paper route because it was a nice big paper route.
Oh.
So I had that for a little bit of time, and it gave me the money I needed to buy a not so great guitar and the Alfred's book 1.
Well, we all had those, by the way.
Oh, yeah. No. Well, again, that was it. There was no internet. There was no, that's how, you had the paper out because you had, they would let you do that, and it's what all of us kids seemed to do. And, then when you wanted, if you couldn't take lessons, if you weren't taking lessons, you'd go to the music store and grab, and I remember seeing that Alfred's book 1 and grabbing the Alfred's book 1 and just excitingly going through it. And then I got to a point where it was cool and I'm buying albums and stuff. And again, Hendrix was kind of like the sound. And to this day, while there's a tremendous amount of amazing players, Hendrix was the first player that to me, you never thought about the guitar as much as just the music of it. So the guitar just became part of him. And that intrigued me so much. So I kind of was like, I love this, and how can I do that? So, of course, as a young guy, you go, well, all I need is a Stratocaster.
Yeah.
And I'll sound like Hendrix. And saved up enough money and got a 1979 anniversary Strat, which was a cool guitar because it was a Fender, but it weighed about enough that you could, anchor a large battleship or something.
Why was it heavier than other Strats? I mean, I remember those guitars, but
Jeff, if you remember those, the 70 Strats, man, there would be some that would be great and they'd be light, but the majority of them had terrible contours, and some of them, instead of being made out of the light swamp ash wood, would be made out of the heaviest. And you would think maybe there was concrete underneath that paint.
I had a 73, which I sold to somebody years later, not knowing, but I don't remember that, but that's interesting to know that it was that much heavier. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. But it was a cool guitar because, again, it was their silver anniversary, so it was a silver Strat. It actually said the word anniversary across the top horn. But, again, back in that time, early 80s, it was $325.
Yeah.
And which was a lot of money, but, I had saved my paper out money and I bought this Strat. And my guitar teacher at the time, Richie Rebuff, who's a monstrous player, again, thankfully, throughout the course of my life and continuing today, I have had and have such wonderful people and dear friends that kind of really have helped position me in circumstances that just have to be so thankful for. And again, I try to be aware sometimes that most people don't get the opportunities that I thankfully had gotten. And Richie definitely was, of all the guitar teachers to get, Richie was just a monstrous player, playing with a lot of different players. To this day, he's based out of Missouri and still, I think, working with 2-3 bands and always recording with friends and asked to be on other sessions. But he was my guitar teacher, and I bring him this guitar, and I'm like, Richie, because he had also said, get a Stratocaster, get a cool guitar, and that would be cool and good. And I bring him the guitar, and I'm like, man, okay, I got the Fender, but it don't play well, man, and it doesn't, it's not really what I thought. It doesn't sound like Hendrix. And, after, smirking and smiling kind of as we are now, he had said, he goes, well, Chris, man, it needs a setup. This thing's got it's an old guitar. They need to be, kind of set so that they can be at their best for playing. I'm like, and again, as a young kid, really hadn't understood that, or, just take it off the rack, play it, and you're good to go.
So you had to do something. What did you do?
Yeah, well, so the music store I was taking lessons at, I told Richie, I said, well, I guess I'll go have them set it up. And he said, oh, no. He goes, no, take it around the corner. There's this guy, Ronnie DiMarino. He makes guitars, and he does a lot of restoration. He does all the band stuff and a lot of the session guys in the city. Go bring the guitar to him. So I go, okay, cool. And a friend of mine who we were hanging out, I put the guitar in a gig bag, and we ride our bicycles to Ronnie's guitar shop. And I walk into the guitar shop, and, again, Jeff, early 80s, so the vintage guitars at that time were not quite the vintage guitars they are today with the value. So I walk in, and there's 2 custom color Firebirds on one of the counters. There's some vintage Strats. There's some of Ronnie's new custom guitars that he had made, these solid body Strats and chambered Telecasters. And there's these 2 guys in the corner playing jazz boxes, which those guitars I really hadn't seen as of yet. So they really kind of intrigued me as to, wow, check those out. And I put the guitar on the counter, and Ronnie had come to the front, and I said to Ronnie, I said, Richie, my guitar teacher told me I need to have this guitar set up, please. And can I work here? And literally,
is that all in one breath?
Yeah, all in one breath. It was kind of like, please set this up. Can I work here? And he kind of looks at me, and again, I'm, 10, 11 years old. So he looks at me and he goes, we're not really looking for anyone right now, but I'll think about it. And and he goes, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Come pick up your guitar on Saturday. So I say, oh, okay, great. But really, I think I might have said it again. Oh, but I really would love to work. Oh, well, I'll consider it. But again, right now we're not looking for anyone. And I go home to my mom, and again, at this point now, my mom, many people will hear me talk about my dad in that, my dad had gone to Juilliard. My dad was a World War II veteran. My dad was part of the space program, and my dad was this wonderful, gentle, amazing man. And I often talk about all these things about him. And my mom, equally so. My mom was a woman who, thankfully, because her husband was working with the space program, at that time didn't have to work, and in fact started to work because I remember her saying to my dad, at some point, it only takes so long to, take care of the house and do the things I have to do. It gets kind of boring. And my dad said, well, we don't need the money, but by whatever you want to do. If you want to do something, go ahead, and whatever money you make, spend it on yourself, spend it on the kids, because I got, the rest of it covered. And here now she found herself in the situation of not having him, and the complete opposite. So she ended up working 3 jobs, going to school at night so she could be a nurse. And earlier on, when my dad had just passed, just to give you the level of a woman she was, became a grief counselor for other women who had just lost their husbands, because she didn't want them to feel the way she felt.
Wow, that's amazing.
So again, Jeff, I have to thank strong, kind people to look up to throughout my life. First and foremost, starting with my 2 parents, wonderful, wonderful people. But I come home to, the house, and I tell my mom, I went to this guitar shop, and you had to see all the stuff. There's guys playing. There's these really cool guitars. And I asked the gentleman if I could work there. I think he thinks I'm nuts because I'm such a young kid. I don't think he thinks I'm serious. And if you come with me to pick up the guitar, he'll know I'm serious, because you'll tell him I'm serious, and maybe he'll let me work there. So my mother, again, always being very supportive of everything I did. Can tell you stories, Jeff, about her sitting out reading either a medical book or a novel, because she always enjoyed reading, outside in the car while I went to band practice, because when I started playing well enough that I could be in a band, I, of course, didn't drive a car. But I sometimes I would try out for bands that weren't close to my house, so I couldn't ride the bike, and, of course, couldn't bring the amp. So my mother would load the amp, let me put the amp in her car, put the guitar, and would drive me to these rehearsals and hang out outside reading her, medical books that she had to study for school, or read a novel to get a moment to relax, and wait for me while I was, playing with friends and stuff.
So did she take you back on Saturday? That was...
That's what happened? No. Yeah, so we ended up going back on Saturday, pick up the guitar. Ronnie had said it was ready. And when we go to pick up the guitar, my mother starts telling Ronnie about how she'd, all Cris has been talking about is working at this guitar shop, and boy, he would love the opportunity. And Ronnie kind of was still in the same line of, he was very kind and very polite, but was like, well, we're not really looking for anyone right now. And at one point, she then explained to him, she's like, well, Ronnie, his dad passed away just recently, and she goes, if he's here, I know he'll be with some guys where he'll be doing something cool and learning something, and I think he won't get in any trouble. And unbeknownst to my mom or myself, Ronnie's father really had not played a role in his life, and it was only his mom that took care of him.
Oh, so that probably connected him. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it seemed like at that moment it changed, and he immediately started. I remember just the conversation just turned to, well, if he's going to work here though, he's got to do whatever I tell him. And my mom, always being pretty quick to a comment, said, well, Ronnie, let him clean your bathrooms, and if he doesn't do it, fire him. He has to he has to learn how life works. And this will be his first opportunity to do so. So ask him to do what you need him, and hopefully he'll do it well. But if he doesn't, then you let him know. And Ronnie then said, okay, well, fine. He can start on Saturday. And if he gets his homework done and you're okay with it, we work late on Thursday and Friday. He can come after doing his homework on Thursdays and Fridays.
Wow, that's cool.
And that's what I did.
And you're like, what, 11 years old or so? Or something?
Yeah. So I'm at that point too, and I'm often referred to now as the last of that old world apprenticeship, where I spent the first year of working in Ronnie's shop sweeping floors and polishing guitars. I didn't walk in there and they go, okay, well, this is how you set up a guitar.
Yeah, but you're 11 years old.
Right.
That's...
Exactly. So there I was, and Jeff, totally in love with the notion of just I was around all the guitars. And again, unbeknownst to me, in that moment, and I think it's a little bit of the lost art of guitar, lutherie and learning was, you spend all that time around the guitars but not working on them. When I finally did touch one of the guitars, and Ronnie said, "Okay, Chris, get that Les Paul in the back and take off the Tune-O-Matic, get that stop bar off. I knew what all the parts, so I didn't have to go, what am I doing?" So he didn't have to spend the time with me to get the basics so that we could get to the main part of the job. So the focus was then on the main part of the job, because that year of sweeping and polishing those guitars, he'd come out and go, "Did you make sure you got underneath the tailpiece? Is the Tune-O-Matic, looking good, or all the screws tight, or whatever he might have said?" And it was there that you learned all the parts.
So you were working on guitars at 12 years old, roughly, huh?
Well,
you were kind of doing some small things, but you were really
doing some small things.
them.
And the thing, Jeff, that I tell you and kind of sets me up for the archtops is around 13, Ronnie had told me to go into the back to get a guitar that the binding was falling off of. So we were going to be doing this binding restoration. And he says, "There's a guitar in the back. I want you to get it out of the case. The binding's going bad, so we're going to have to take the binding off. So you got to take the whole. I want you to take the guitar." And in my early years, that's what I did. Was I would prepare the guitars. So Ronnie, his son Steven, a couple of other guys, very noted, Tom Marcel. So those guys could work on them and do the main parts of the restorations. I do all the prep work. And I go to get this guitar, and the guitar happens to be a D'Angelico.
Oh.
And Jeff, I tell you, so I opened up the case, sitting in the case, but it had the strings, the binding was falling off, but the guitar was sound, it was solid. And I happened to just strum the strings, and the sound that came out of this guitar, amazing, literally to the point where, without exaggerating, I looked around the side of the case to see where it had to be plugged into something, or something had to be going on that would make it that loud. And that then kind of set me up and my mind to think of, well, if you can make a guitar that does that without the help of a pickup or an amp, that's really something. And I immediately began getting interested in archtop guitars.
So that's how it started. Yeah.
That's how it started. And I always say, to the point where my interest in the guitar, although Ronnie himself was with the Lester Lannon Orchestra and the jazz, musician, my interest in the guitar came before my passion and love for the music, because I was still like a blues rock and roll guy.
Yeah.
I still had my Stratocaster and all that, but when it came to, the interest within the guitar, the interest was completely in that archtop and how that thing did what it did without the help of the amps and the pickups and stuff like that.
So as the years kind of went by, tell us a little bit about some of the, the learning and how you got to a certain point. You were there for quite a while, right?
I was there for quite a while, and again, it was just an incredible time to grow up in. In fact, beyond an incredible time, it was just like, the planets were all in line, and it was you couldn't ask for a better situation, in that it was the early 80s, so the vintage guitars weren't vintage yet. And so guys were either playing vintage Gibsons or D'Angelicos, or they were waiting for a new guitar from Jimmy D'Acquisto. And because Jimmy D'Acquisto was a friend of the shops, as well as John Monteleone and the guys kind of doing some key stuff, but really Jimmy was the guy making the archtop. So if the guys weren't playing vintage stuff, they were waiting on a new guitar from Jimmy. And those guys, because everybody was on it, were coming to us, and we would basically do the setups and the general stuff for the guitars, so the guys had them ready for their, gigs. And again, on the island was hopping at that time as far as gigs and things to do. Guys would basically play from sometimes Wednesday, but definitely from Thursday on to Sunday. Guys were gigging regularly, so you always had these guitars coming through. And the guys also wanted to show off the guitars. So there was that. So you had this constant influx of just the most amazing guitars that, regrettably, now a lot of guys, and girls that are building only get the opportunity to read about. And maybe thankfully they'll get the chance to look at one or two, they'll see it at a certain point in their career. This was daily. This was, so, guys were gigging with, DA New Yorkers. Guys were gigging with 59 Cherry Burst Les Pauls. I mean, as I got older and I was 17, 18-year-old kid, I was gigging with a 61 custom color Strat, because while they were getting expensive, they weren't quite expensive. And the same thing with Jimmy. Jimmy's guitars were not, in 1987, I think they were a New Yorker was $5,500 or $6,500, which again, a lot of money in the mid '80s, but not enough that guys weren't getting them and using them. So you saw the guitars. So that was an immensely powerful learning tool, as well as trips to Jimmy's shop.
Wow.
Same thing with John Monteleone's. Back then, a little bit earlier on, companies like Stu Mack and Luthier's Mercantile, while they were there, they didn't have as many as the supplies that they now have. Now it's amazing the things that they have and you can get from them, and they're wonderful to have. Back then, I guess they too were just earlier companies, so they were just starting out. So one of the key things we had needed was the plastics for the bindings. And back then you didn't get it in strips. You got it in these big sheets.
Oh,
and
wow.
we would get, so you would get the sheet and you'd have to then cut it to whatever size. And we'd get that from a company called Delmar. And Delmar, Jimmy had the plastics, John had the plastics, and we had the plastics. And because we were doing restoration, we were doing our custom, more rock and roll, solid body type guitars, we seemingly ran out of stuff a lot more faster than anyone else. And Jimmy, with all his custom making, seemed to always have the most. So we'd call John, we'd call Jimmy, whoever might have the sheet of plastic. And there was a couple of times we would run out to that Jimmy shop, and it was an opportunity then to see, all the stuff he was working on. So it was, at that early time, working in Ronnie's shop, the amount and level of guitars that were available, having access to Jimmy. Again, a little later on, I remember while I had met Jimmy a couple of times, having come to the shop, the guys knew how much I respected him. And when I finally met him as a young guy, they basically had said, Chris, there's someone who would like to meet you. And I always knew, again, being a shy kid, I always kind of had a sense of what my role was, I was the kid in the back of the shop. So I always try to be very respectful if I was, when we would go out to Ronnie's shop or John's shop or anywhere, I always try to be very aware and have them be very aware that I wasn't touching anything. Like I remember one time being at Jimmy's shop and, making sure my hands were to their sides, so he would know that I wasn't, being, hands-on and trying to grab.
That's pretty smart.
I so admired, and with, even at that early age, I think maybe then I didn't understand that what was happening was this firsthand knowledge of the guitars, more so than that many then after me would never have. But I think I was very appreciative of, as I had said to you with the Henry, this was something that I felt very comfortable in. And it had saved me from that despair of my dad passing. So I was always very conscious, always very thankful to be in the situation I was in.
But your life, you really developed a purpose in life at a very early age, it seems.
Absolutely. And I think, sometimes you'll hear people say, I kind of went all in. I wanted it to be so that I had no other option. This way I could dedicate myself to it. And that's, Jeff, how I totally felt about it. It was the only thing I felt comfortable in. If you took me out of that situation, I was quite, having had the situation of being in the shop, when I would step out, go with friends with parties or anything like that, I was the shy guy again. I was, and quite honestly, to this day, I'm still the same way. Always very thankful to be meeting some people and the possibility of making new friends is always wonderful, but I'm always kind of quiet about it. You talk about guitars and, I don't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what?
It was the one thing I always, it's the one place where I felt comfortable. I felt comfortable in that what I knew I felt comfortable with, but also too just in the people that I would talk to. I felt that, not even saw or thought, but I literally would feel that similarity amongst people in the business. So it was one of those things where it just always felt right.
So let me just ask you, you worked there through school, I presume, from what you're telling me, and what happened? You got finished with school, and then what happened then?
Well, went through all of school in the shop again, and basically lived through the guitar shop, every aspect. I mean, every girlfriend, every date I ever had usually started out by saying, "I'll meet you at the guitar shop."
That's cool.
Yeah. In fact, my wife Jeanette today, who equally is just this wonderful and dear person. I always joke she was the girl. I would say, because I would say this to every girlfriend. I was like, I want to be a great guitar player and make guitars for a living. And I was saying this as a young kid. And they'd all go, that's wonderful, but what are you really going to do?
Oh.
Jeanette was the first girl that when I said that, she goes, that's awesome, fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And there was never that question of, what are you really going to do? She just said, that's wonderful.
Maybe
great.
That was the moment of endearment, probably.
Yeah, it was, again, thankfully so, always had very wonderful people in my life. So every girlfriend was really cool, really great. But yeah, I think some of them just didn't fully get the whole thing. And it was cool, but they weren't musicians. And while they appreciated music, they just didn't understand why I would want to play this thing 8 hours a day and spend my entire time in the guitar shop.
But that certainly shows today. What kind of hours as you got older, were you putting in more time, I would presume?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I used to, if I could, have a half day. I went to Catholic school, so I would have days off for whatever the different Catholic holidays were. So I would immediately be at the shop. So if there was any given opportunity that I could be at the shop, I always would be. And then, of course, after I graduated high school and got out of high school, I was at the shop all the time and just then basically worked like a normal job. We got there around 9:30, and we're there until 6:30.
So you work like 5 days a week or 6 days or what?
Yeah, no, worked 5. We had off Sunday and Monday.
Oh, okay.
But then even back then we were doing a lot of the shows. So every once in a while there was a weekend show that we'd have to go to and stuff like that. I was rehearsing and playing in bands when I was earlier on. There came a point where, and I kind of remember it, where I was a good guitar player, but I was never a great guitar player, and I wanted to be great.
Yeah.
And I wanted, all these guys I admired would come into the shop because, again, we were dealing with a lot of all the really top guys and whatnot. And you'd sit there and they were always so kind with their time and explaining stuff and showing me stuff. But at the same time, every time, and they'd sit there and they'd play so easily and you go, wow. And that never was me. I mean, again, while I felt I was good and enjoyed playing, I always felt like I had to work at playing.
And you could always see these guys, like you say, that just seem to, it just flows naturally. And I've seen that too.
Yeah, and I equate it because I feel this way when I'm building, which, again, let me know I was in my right spot where I needed to be. You'd watch them play. Like, you watch Jim Hall play guitar, listen to Jim Hall play guitar, and the music becomes like the breathing. It literally, it has all the pauses, all the stops, all of the nuances right where they need to be a conversation and it just flows. It just has, and I use liquid flow, that sense, that visual. I like it in my guitars. I like it everything should just move very freely, very comfortably. And I use that as a gauge too with the players. If they have to think about the instrument, something's wrong. They should just be able to play. And when they do that, then you have everything. It's perfect. But I was the player that loved to play, still do, although I don't get as much time. But I would get to that one part, and in my brain I'd go, okay, this is the part you always have trouble with, man. So come on, you're going to do it. It's going to work out great. It's going to sound awesome. Go for it. But I would have to say that to myself. And again, you look at these guys, they're not saying that. They're just playing because it's just so perfect for them. And I realized at some point, me explaining to them the guitars, what needed to be done, the repair, the custom build, what I was anticipating, how I was going to get the sound for their instrument. Here were these guys I so admired and respected, and all these different players. And they were listening to me with the intent that I would watch them playing. So and in that moment, I was like, okay, and again, my philosophy of life is, you want to strive for your best. You don't want to be better than someone just to be better, but you want to give your best. You want to show your best. And here I was equal with them. And I was, in my mind, offering them something as meaningful as what they were offering me in explaining how I would care for their instrument, what needed to be done, something that they didn't understand, just as they very kindly had tried to explain, well, Chris, here, play this chord here and then go to the, whatever it might have been, and I'm struggling to get it. That gave me my spot.
That's really that really kind of gives you an equal footing in some ways, and really elevates your own thinking, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. And Jeff, with regard to as a business sense, it gives you a comfort in knowing that the guys, the players, the girls, whoever your client there is, then comfortable to explain and express to you what they're feeling musically, what their needs are as a musician. And they're getting that confidence that you're going to be able to understand and get what they need, so that the instrument comes out just the way it, and really it was so that you just I felt that comfortableness of, okay, here, this is my spot, and I'm really comprehending, understanding what they're trying to say to me, and equally so, they're seeing that I know what's going to get us to what they need for that instrument.
Well, let me sort of advance a little bit, and it's a question I want to ask you, which I think is a pivotal one, and that is, was there a moment early in your career that, it dawned on you that you were really in the business? Was there some moment of realization for all that?
Definitely. And again, I think because I grew up in the business, I kind of was always there. So as I had said, early on, I would ride my bicycle to the shop. On those late nights, Ronnie he had this big station wagon, or his son had a van, and they'd put my bicycle in the back of the van or the station wagon, so I wasn't riding my bicycle home in the dark. But, again, every girlfriend that I ever had, we'd meet up at the guitar shop. So it literally was always a part of me.
Yeah.
And you kind of, and there's a comfort there in that. And I'll tell you, Jeff, I realized I was in business for the first time when I was on my own as Mirabella Guitars.
Wow.
Because again, in working with Ronnie, even if he wasn't like right next to me working on another guitar, there was always that comfort of knowing, well, if I get stuck, I'll ask Ronnie, or Steve, there was someone with me. And again, these wonderful noted other repair people, builders and stuff like that. There was someone to go, so, hey, I'm stuck on this. How would you approach it? There was that comfort of knowing that you couldn't have a problem that you wouldn't have some help with. And again, being in the back of the shop, in the workshop area, there was never the focus of the paperwork and the taxes and the legalities of a business. So when I first found myself on my own and stepped into my own thing, and even though I had all those years with Ronnie, so I had this sense of knowing that I could do this, I still felt in a way that I couldn't because I was on my own. So that it was at that moment that I realized that okay, this is yours now. Yeah, this is yours now, and the decisions you make will be your decisions, and you won't say, oh well, you can't go, oh, this is what so and so told me to do. It was all you.
And when was that, Chris, that you went off on your own?
That was like 90. I left Ronnie's shop. I think it was in 94, late 94, turning into early 95. Mm-hmm. That winter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, it was that. Yeah, no, going into the 95 New Year. And I would tell you then, yeah, I think I spent like a little bit of time, struggling to figure out if I could do this on my own. And because again, when you're just so comfortable, and I was content with being a part of Ronnie's shop. Prior to that, the idea of making a Mirabella guitar, from that focus, because again, I was such a little kid working for Ronnie, that was never the concern at any moment. It was make cool stuff, really make the players have what they need, get to enjoy the music and be a part of this whole thing. It was never, okay, and I want to put my name on it. It was just, be a part of this. So
you were in your early middle 20s when this happened, is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was 20 when I officially went to get the because I started out with a DBA. When I went to get the DBA, I was 25, 26 years old, somewhere around there.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the business itself. I mean, you've already had a really long career for a guy that's still pretty young in my book. So what I want to talk about is some of the milestones and the challenges that took place in the years since you've been in business as Mirabella. And, this is the part of the show that, a lot of listeners tell me that they get a lot out of because they learn how folks deal with the everyday realities of running a business, building a career. So I'm sure there's a few things that happen along the way that really stand out. Well, what are some of those?
Oh, definitely. Again, having been in the business for so long, but being the young guy, it puts me in a very interesting spot today, and now I find myself. I've very kindly been given the tag of the youngest of all the dinosaurs, which I wear very proudly, because I do have such a connection and a tie-in to the older group of luthiers, dealers, just the industry, and a lot of the people that I remember, and quite honestly still are dear friends, are the older as all these newer dealers, builders, just a whole new group of people come into it. So, in that, it's a cool spot. Early on, it was actually, in some regards, somewhat of a hindrance in that as I came to be my own, a lot of the guys that were still top guys that remembered me from the old shop, I was still the kid in the back.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I can tell you, Jeff, as like a funny story, and I love him dearly because he's so supportive of the lutherie community and just music, guitars in general, is Rudy Penta and Rudy's Guitars. Sure. And Rudy I've known Rudy since I was about 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And Rudy to this day, when he sees me, he always gives me this wonderful hug and a kiss on the cheek, and then tells me what a great kid I am. And this is now at 47 years old with kids of my own, and he's still calling me a good kid, which I have to say I appreciate immensely. But it was, it took some time for the guys to realize I was not the kid anymore. Although, I still sometimes get called that. So it was hard to, maneuver around that and say, hey, check this out. This is what, but as I started doing things, guys would start appreciating and seeing the stuff. I mean, as far as like the milestones with working with Ronnie, there was numerous ones because again, Ronnie and that shop had such a reputation. Ronnie in himself had been John Lennon's personal guitar tech from the time he left the Beatles until the time John passed.
Wow.
And he was also part of the Lester Landon Orchestra, so he had played for the Queen twice, I believe 5 presidents, and in that the shop had a high caliber of integrity, and again, all the guys. Tom Marcel was working in the shop, who was the apprentice to John Monteleone. Again, Jimmy was friends, John was friends. So the people that were walking in and out of that shop, as well as all the original guitar players. So those stories that now we read in books of the D'Angelico players, I thankfully as a kid was getting firsthand.
Yeah.
Guys like Michael Katz and George Mell, Ray Gogarty, Don DeMarco, those guys would come in with different guitars, different DAs, different, notable archtops. And even though I was the long-haired kid in the Led Zeppelin shirt, they were all very kind and sweet, and they would call up from the front of the shop and say, hey, Chris, come up front. We got something cool you like to check out. And they would make me a part of that. So, stuff like that. Stuff like we had restored, Ronnie was the shop tasked with restoring Hank Garland's Stromberg.
Oh.
And it was, and a real... So this guitar, to my understanding, was the prototype for the Birdland.
Really?
As well as it's a Stromberg Deluxe cutaway. It's blonde. It's thin bodied. It's thinner than I think all the other Strombergs. The body's a little bit smaller, and the sound of this thing is just incredible. But like many of the Strombergs, it had the celluloid head plate with the engraved name and everything, and that had started to regrettably crumble as a lot of the celluloid does. And they had sent the guitar to Ronnie, sent it to the shop, and I remember it was accompanied by a letter by Hank's brother Billy that said, this is the first time this guitar will be out of Hank's hands. And we very thankfully had the opportunity to speak with Hank. I think Billy maybe called almost every other day to check on the progress of it and whatnot. But yet again, Jeff, it was one iconic guitars that in today's world you only see in a book.
Yeah.
Where you could touch, and again, I that's why I always comment about how thankful I am, because I was the kid that got to hold the guitar, got to work on the head plate. And I wasn't just looking at it in a book. I actually have blueprints that I drew up from Hank's guitar, because any notable guitar at the time, to digress all the way back to our early question with my dad, I would sit on the kitchen table and my dad and I would draw pictures, and because he was, designing and drafting these planes and stuff like that, he would draw that type of drawing, and I, as a little kid wanting to be like him, would copy it. So I now do these elaborate blueprint drawings, having never gone to school for blueprinting.
So you do that today?
I do that still, yes. Still today. Regrettably, because of the work in the shop, I don't have as much free time. When I worked for Ronnie, there's yet another aspect of the business where your time gets dictated differently. When working for someone, working for Ronnie, I would say, Ronnie, can I blueprint that guitar for us? And Ronnie would think it was a great idea. He'd go ahead, do it. If I took 3 hours, 4 hours to blueprint the whole guitar, it didn't matter. We had, at the end, had the blueprints. In today's world now, thankfully, again, so many of the guys trust me with wonderful DAs, but there's just not enough time to blueprint them all.
So when you got into your own business, what were you building and how were you getting business?
So when I started out on my own, I thankfully had the reputation from Ronnie's shop. In fact, one of the funny stories is very early on, Jay Scott, who was a dear friend, we were at one of the shows, and throughout the years, because I was with Ronnie since I was a little kid, everyone assumed I was one of his children.
Oh.
and it got to the point where it kind of just was along, and you kind of would sigh and go to try to explain how I wasn't. So after a while, I gave up and said, when they'd say, "So how's Dad doing?" I'd go, "Oh, he's good," and just kind of went with it. So here we are at one of the shows, and my dear friend Jay Scott comes up to me and goes, "Chris, man, how's Dad doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I haven't seen him as much, but he's doing, because now I'm older and stuff." So I was like, "I haven't seen him as much, but he's hanging in, he's doing his thing and whatnot." And I was wearing the Mirabella shirt, and he says to me, he points at the corner of the shirt where the logo is, and he goes, "Mirabella," he goes, "what do you know about these guys?" He goes, "I've been hearing like really good things about this. What is this?" And I started laughing, and I was like, "Jeff."
They never knew your last name?
Some did, and I would explain the story, and it seemed like, Jeff, the following week they'd go, "How's Dad?" So I literally gave up. Another funny story quickly, in that when I was a little kid, I would run across the street, because again, I think this is one of those things you could do back then, could never do now. I would get the wine for Ronnie on Thursday and Friday were the late nights, and they would get pizza, or there's an Italian restaurant close by, they'd get like spaghetti dinners, and I would go get the wine for Ronnie and the guys that might be hanging out. And Rose, the owner of the liquor store, who was very sweet, one day as I put the bottle of wine on the register, and give her the money that Ronnie had given me to get it, she says to me, she goes, "Chris, I got to tell you, of all Ronnie's kids, you are the sweetest. And really, you're the one that looks the most like him." And I just didn't have the heart to, again, in that situation to go, "Oh, but I'm not one of his kids." So everybody assumed. Jay's at the show, and he's assuming, and I say to him, I'm like, "Jay, that Mirabella, that's me.
No.
That's my last name." And he very kindly goes, "Oh, well, that's why I'm hearing all this good stuff then."
Yeah.
He goes, but yeah, early on, I immediately started with again, there was that uncertainty. So as I start the business for myself, being with someone for so long, you're not sure you can do things. So I didn't immediately go, "I'm making guitars." I said, "All right, I'll do repair work and restoration work. I'll make the pick guards." I was noted for making all the pick guards of the guitars. So I started there. And that quickly became, and as soon as everybody knew that it was me, they would go, "Oh, well, Chris, I got this DA. Could you take a look at this thing? I have this." And then because I took care of so many of the guys playing vintage guitars, as the guys who were playing the vintage guitars went up in value, they started going, "Chris, I don't think I should be playing this guitar anymore. What kind of guitar do you think I should grab?" And, one would say, "Oh, maybe I'll check this out, check that out," until one dear friend goes, "Hey, Chris, I've been thinking about this. What are you doing with customs? Are you going to do any custom stuff?" And I said, "Yeah, well, I'm going to start focusing on the archtops, and I want to do that, but just got to find some time." And he was like, "Well, I kind of need a guitar that I can gig with. Can we do something?" And that kind of started it. And with that, Jeff, I'll tell you, that first guitar then, because everybody was playing and stuff, he showed it to a couple of, and instantaneously, almost immediately, a bunch of guys started coming to me and saying, "Chris, I saw, John's guitar, I saw Tad's guitar. I'd like one of those too. Can you make one for me?" And then it just went from there.
And you've been doing that ever since.
And been doing that ever since. And then what was really nice is as things progressed even further on, and the importance of vintage guitars became what they are, as the world has changed, and now they're, again, first as a young guy, there was Jimmy. And in our world, in my world, there was no other guitar maker. Didn't know of any. In fact, the first other guitar maker I had ever heard of was Linda Menzer, because Paul Schmidt, when he did the first Acquired of the Angels book, put a small picture in the book. There was a picture in the book noting that Linda had acquired a government grant from Canada to study with Jimmy for, I think it was a winter or two. And I remember looking at that picture and going, oh my, how cool is this? There's actually other people that do this, because all the guys were playing vintage stuff or they were playing one of Jimmy's guitars. So from that, just start again. So as time has now gone on, there has become kind of a noting of the New York style of guitar making, because when Bob Benedetto had done his book, it kind of opened up a whole new type of genre and a different way to construct archtops as to the way that I had known. That was pretty much foundation of D'Angelico, D'Acquisto. So there's been more attention towards that as of lately. The Met had an exhibit, Guitar Heroes, which focused on D'Angelico, D'Acquisto, John Monteleone, and very thankfully through that show, a lot of the guys were like, well, Chris, you're a part of that as well. And that was very humbling and very kind. And from that, there was more interest and more intrigue, and that kind of steered what guitars and what I was doing, because I was always doing whatever the players really needed. So, there were spots where I was doing a lot of electric laminate or even fully carved, but electric guitars, so the guys could gig. And then as things have now changing, guys are doing more recording in smaller venues. The acoustic guitars became the primary focus. And I still do the electrics, but now it's, the full focus of the acoustics.
So one of the things that I've noticed is that you haven't been afraid to sort of break the mold with the way your guitars look. I mean, you grew up with these famous instruments, but your instruments have taken on a look pretty much of their own. How did that happen?
I think I was very conscious of that. You want to contribute something meaningful that's yours. So you want to have something that they say, you did. And I think I focused on wanting to figure out how to make the guitars notably mine. Like when you come in and you see a player playing an old D'Angelico, it says it on the headstock, but you really don't need to know that it says it on the headstock, because the guitar just has such a personality of John D'Angelico, the creator of it, and I wanted that. I wanted something where the guys would see the guitar and go, that's a Mirabella. Yeah. So I wanted it. So I worked. So I started experimenting with things as far as I've always said and firmly believe, if you stay true to tradition in the sense that what makes the guitar function and work properly, it's like the skydiver who jumps and knows he has to shoot. You can go to any length, but you still have the security of knowing that it's at some point you get to pull the chute, or if you're the bungee jumper, the rope's going to stop you from going too far. It's that same thing. So I had that comfort of all those years, all those vintage guitars, all the lessons from Ronnie, from Jimmy, from Tom Marcel, later from John Monteleone, all these different aspects and fundamental tools that I could say, okay, that you hold as the basis of what you're doing. Now everything else is up for it. Let's see what happens. Allowed for a lot of opportunity to really mess with things. And a lot of positive results came from it. So I've always worked towards trying to get the guitars to look real distinctive, like what we said with players and how some of them just it's like breathing. I always wanted the guitars to have kind of like a flow, that everything complemented everything. So I try to work hard on that. So as well as it being this completely functioning acoustic tool, it also inspired the player to pick it up, that they looked at it and would go, oh man, I got to play it. And then as soon as they had it in their hand, they would go, oh my goodness, this thing sounds just the way I hoped and hear in my head, and then wouldn't put it down.
So let me, since we're kind of into the current time zone of your business, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I know that in this last weekend you were at the Artisan Guitar Show. So I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about it, and then maybe broaden out a little and talk about the value and benefits of these events, both for builders like yourself, as well as what the attendees get out of it. What can you tell us?
Yeah, the shows I think are wonderful in that it's an excellent opportunity for the players, guys interested in the guitars that don't get to see whether they see them being used at shows or concerts or they see them in magazines. It's their opportunity to kind of come see the guitars, play them for themselves, talk with the builders, and see if possibly that might be an instrument for them. So it's really, for that, absolutely wonderful. Again, for me, it's intriguing because, again, it's such a new world with so many builders. As I grew up, there was none of that. So when guys say, oh, we're now in the golden age of guitar making, there is definitely, an aspect of truth in that there is just so much variety and possibilities with what the builders are doing, because you just see so many different things. The thing that I find with the shows and that many builds is that much opportunities. Sometimes, I think like the younger builders, newer builders can get a little lost in that because, as we were saying, you want to do something distinctive and make something that someone will take note to what you're doing. But sometimes you can fall into a trap of wanting to do something innovative and creative, and you stop there, and you forget that your focus has to be constantly on the players and what they need. So if you're doing something that's very different and you think is going to be some great innovation, may not be for the players.
Well, then it sort of becomes artwork at that point. I mean, it becomes a real piece of art, which is fine.
And absolutely right, and fine. But then that's what it is, And again, the cool thing about musical instruments is they're not that one-dimensional thing. They're not just simply a tool, and they're not just simply artwork. They're usable artwork if you hone in, get it. Yeah. In my opinion, right.
Well, if you hit both marks, that's maybe the best of both worlds.
Well, I always say, Jeff, too, like a perfect scenario, an example of it is you can take a Ferrari and put jets on the side of it. You've innovated a Ferrari. That thing will be the fastest Ferrari ever. But the problem is it's not too practical in any aspect. Yeah. So if it moves, it's going to crash. It's not usable. And that's the same thing that, new builders, I think, have to be aware of, and even over, anyone who's saying, I want to innovate the instrument, I think, innovation, the players are always moving. They're always changing. So because of them, we as builders have to change as well, which is a wonderful thing. But I believe it has to be dictated by their needs, what they need, because if you, as a builder, start innovating and then you're trying to convince the players, that won't work.
Well, that's kind of what I've often talked about, the difference between being product-driven and market-driven in business, and that kind of applies here. If you're building guitars, if you're in the business, you got to sell guitars. What you're describing is being tuned in, to what the market wants, which means, an instrument that first and foremost plays well and sounds great. I mean, isn't that the first?
Right. And I think that's the thing that you have to, that is the main structure of the business, of your direction, of your goal. How you package that, quote unquote, using that term lightly, but how you package that is your style, is your look. But your style and your look has to still showcase this phenomenal working instrument. I think at the shows, which again is a wonderful avenue because it's also for the builders an opportunity to talk with other builders, get ideas. I always love it too because it's a selfish way of spending some time with friends that I only get to see at the shows. But you can, as a builder, being in a room with other builders, trying to show off your stuff, you can try to impress another builder. And if your focus then is to impress another builder, then in my opinion, you've lost sight of where you really need to be, because while it's always wonderful to have the appreciation and the acknowledgement from another maker, your true, from the business standpoint, and quite honestly, what will give you longevity and really let you allow you to make a mark is that acknowledgement from the players. So when the players tell you you got it right, that's when you know you're really where you're
so right. You're so right. Just a kind of a technical information question. Your business now, I mean, is almost everything custom, and do you have always a full flow of business coming through?
I thankfully so, and it really is at this point. Could be all the Mirabella guitars. I'm tremendously sentimental. And again, as I've said, Jeff, and will always try to continue to say, I'm just so thankful to people that I've had the opportunity to have as I've gone the path that I have. So because of that, I kind of like still doing restoration work. So I don't do as much. I kind of limit it now to the D'Angelicos and D'Acquistos and a handful of other little things, but I love those stories and I love those guys, and now more and more of them we're losing, they're getting older.
Yeah.
Some of them are retiring, and thankfully, you can still have a conversation with them, but more so, especially, some of the original D'Angelico players, they're just getting to an age now where they're passing, and they're just special. I mean, all the players. I mean, at this weekend show, at the Artisan Show, the guys that are playing now, again, Jimmy Bruno was there, who's thankfully, we should hopefully have many, many, many more years with Jimmy. But with respect, he's one of the older guys. But, you have players of that level. But you also have, like, younger guys like Sean McGowan and Perry Smith, Adam Miller, all these wonderful younger players doing such phenomenal things that you can hand them a guitar and say, "Hey, man, what are you thinking of this?" Steve Herberman, Ray Matuza, all these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful players. But yeah, and they're all special. But the older guys and the stories, again, not with Jimmy Bruno, he had us this weekend just laughing because of all these wonderful stories and all these situations he had. And with the older D'Angelico guys, some of those stories, Joe Romano, just recently, I very kindly is acknowledged on several occasions in the new Acquired of the Angel guitar book that they just put out, the 3rd edition.
Oh, and nice.
Yeah, actually, it's been a wonderful time because actually right now, too, the Met now has the Play It Loud exhibit going on, and the Pete Townsend gold top that I restored in 2002 is on display, and a friend had let me know. And very kindly, I found out that while many instruments are acknowledged with having been repaired, Pete Townsend's gold top is the only instrument that it says it was restored and put back together by Cris Mirabella. So in the entire exhibit, they were kind enough
that's pretty slick. That's pretty
so
slick.
Yeah, it was just very kind, very nice.
Yeah.
So you have all that stuff, but with the Acquired of the Angels book, Joe, and here's a perfect example of why these guys are so special. They tell you all these different stories about D'Angelico, and what they didn't realize they were telling you as they share these wonderful stories, they'd give you insight into how D'Angelico did things. And then I went and he showed me the neck, and they'd be telling their story. But if you listen to it, you get key aspects of the neck got done here for whatnot. And Joe had told me the story of D'Angelico being a friend of his playing a trick on him and getting some. At the time, he didn't know it, but getting some beat-up guitar. And when Joe came to pick up the guitar, D'Angelico pretends to fall on it and crush it.
Oh, geez.
And then when he sees he gets back up and goes, "Oh, I can't believe I just smashes the guitar all around." Joe, horrified, of course, then when he finds out when D'Angelico starts laughing, he chases D'Angelico around, the shop, going, "I'm going to kill you. You made me think you broke my guitar," and it's Jeff, and like that. And you sit there and you laugh, and it's these wonderful stories. Well, regrettably, Joe, passed a few years ago. And when they came and when they asked for the pictures for the new book and stuff, I had very hesitantly but wanting to ask Paul if he would consider, and explain the story. Actually, Joe had given me this wonderful letter saying about, because he had 70 years of playing guitar, and he mentions the story. So I sent it to Paul and said, "Paul, listen, in the other two editions of the book, it always mentions a client of D'Angelico as the bunt of this joke. It didn't say a name." So I had sent it, and I said, "It would mean the world if you could put Joe's name in the book." And when the guys came to bring me Chris Paradise, Rob Stagno, a couple of guys who were involved in the third edition of the book, dear friends and wonderful people, they were like, "Oh, Chris, you got to check out the book." And I'm enjoying their moment of their, after all this labor of working with Paul and the book getting done, they're showing me, and they were so happy that, "Oh, look, and there's a picture from your shop, and here's a picture for your shop." And as soon as they were done kind of showing me and presented the book, I immediately just, and politely but discreetly, start paging through the book and find the story. And sure enough, and so kind of Paul, he put Joe's name in it.
Oh,
so there's
nice.
Joe's name in the book. And again, it's one of those things, having grown up around these people, I think it's such a vital thing to business to be in tune with your clientele and appreciate them and what they're offering you, so you then can offer them your best. Joe was like the epitome of that, as far as he so loved the music, so loved the players. He would come hang out in the shop on a Saturday and play tunes with any of the guys that were coming to pick up their guitars and stuff and tell these stories. So I know how much it would have meant to him to know that his name was in there. So that just was like, I appreciate all the guys and having me acknowledged in the book. Another milestone to mention, as we did before, I had the opportunity to complete Jimmy D'Acquisto's oval hole Centura, which he had started but never finished at the time of his passing. So there were two guitars, solo that John Monteleone had completed, and this oval hole that I had the opportunity to complete, and they're now acknowledged in that book, which was very nice. And again, Jeff, all wonderful things, but having Joe's name in the book. Well, because again, to me, as far as business and stuff, if you follow the players, listen to them, they'll really kind of keep you going. Well, it's them that we need to, make sure we're doing something for.
It's great. It's great advice. Since we're running to the end of the interview, and it's a long one, I do have one sort of kind of final question that I just want to get, a little feedback on. And that's, if we were looking into the crystal ball, what might you see ahead for Cris Mirabella? I mean, you're a young guy, you got a long ways to go, even though you've been in the business for 37 or so of your 47 years. What are some of the things, if there's anything that you hope to accomplish or experience? Some people just want to live it day to day. How about you?
I think, again, kind of with that, where we were leaving off with the last question, I kind of, whatever, as the players evolve, I want to evolve the guitars with them. I say it this way, but I truly mean it humbly. I want to be the best. And I don't want to be the best because I want to be better than anyone and say that I am. I want to be the best because I want the guys, girls, the players to know that if they're getting a Mirabella guitar, they're going to get an instrument that they can take on their musical journey and get where they're thinking, where they're imagining, where their mind is taking them. So I kind of want to listen to what the players are doing, what they need. I have, an immense amount of ideas that I think will be great ideas for the guitars, and I want to then, bounce them off of the players to see if it really does work. The guitars that I'm offering now, I'm really proud of, and I'm glad that everyone's using them. So I will continue making those as well. And, and pushing the concepts of them as, each individual player sees fit. But it's, my whole kind of thing and philosophy has been, I've had the opportunity to grow up around D'Angelicos and D'Acquistos, other builders now that have, I've respected their work, and it's kind of my logic not to just, walk amongst the giants or walk within the shadows of the giants of the past, but I want to, at some point when I'm done, and being done not in retiring but just no longer here, I want to be one of the names that will stand with them. So that's a pretty good vision. I mean, you've really articulated it really well, and there's so much to what you've done, and it's an incredible story. We could do another hour and 20 minutes without even skipping a beat, and maybe we'll have to at some point down the road, and we'll be a pleasure. We'll do a sequel, but I do want to really thank you for taking all this time to come on, and I'm pretty sure that listeners are going to get an awful lot out of this terrific interview. So that would be wonderful, and definitely what I would hope.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much again for coming on.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
So what did you think of the interview with Cris Mirabella? We always want to hear from you. You can do that easily through the official episode page on our website at guitarbusinessradio.com, or on Facebook and Twitter at Guitar Business, or email us directly at contact@guitarbusinessradio.com. And of course, if none of that works for you, just call us on our GBR hotline at 888-777-2404. You can do that right now if you like, or later. Operators are standing around singing popular hymns. Please give them a call so I don't have to listen to it much longer. So what an interview that was. It was long, I know. And I can tell you, we could have easily gone on another hour or more. Cris is quite a storyteller, and he does it with such meaning. You can tell this is somebody who loves his work, loves the business, cares deeply about people, and about being the very best that he can possibly be. It's a very strong conviction. And how many people do you know who pretty much knew at 10 or 11 years old where their destination was, in the grand scale, of course? Not many, I'm sure. Having that dedication and focus at such an early age and being able to stick with it for the better part of 4 decades is something to marvel at. But it shows, doesn't it? Look at his work. And I keep coming back to the fact that Cris is only 47 years old. There's still a long way to go, and it will be worth watching to see what comes next. Another thing that stood out for me is how he talks about his colleagues in the business. That's one of the things I've heard a lot from other builders over many years. It's a camaraderie that exists in this business. You don't see that kind of overt competitiveness that is sometimes present in other industries or in bigger businesses. Finally, he made a very important point near the end of the interview about the importance of building for the player. It can be very easy to lose sight of that at times, and I likened it to the idea of being market-driven versus product-driven. And I'm not saying it needs to be one or the other. Often a balance of the two works best, but typically, when you move in one direction or the other to an extreme, it can have profound effects on your business in terms of sales. Of course, if sales are not an important factor, it's kind of a moot point. However, usually you have to sell something to stay in business. Obviously, there are exceptions, but usually there are not. Generally speaking, you have to be concerned about what customers will buy, and ultimately, it comes down to benefits. This is not a judgment of any kind, but if you want to sell something to somebody else, the focus has to be on their needs and requirements and what works for them. Just saying. So while you're thinking about how to respond to all this, stay positive. Stay focused on your destination or destinations, but keep all your options open on how you're going to get there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week on episode 63. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.